Kia ora, everyone. I'm sitting through the interwebs with the man with the hair, and he's just covered it up with his symbiosis hat. Jono, Frew, mate, how's your day been? You're just having a mini celebration because you're about to launch something. That's bloody awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, today's been real cool. I had a Quorum board meeting this morning where we're talking about doing a few events and things, and we're just holding out on some progression with regards to a funding application with MPI that's going through a few hurdles. And today, just sort of launched with my business partner Peter Barrett that we're going to go on a bit of a nationwide tour for 5 weeks, traveling around the country, spreading the word on regenerative agriculture.
Magic. I was wondering where I'd heard that name, Peter Barrett, and it was from you. His name came up in conversation the other day as an absolute leader on Banks Peninsula there. What does he mean?
No, Peter's out.
Not Banks Peninsula then, different person.
He's out on Lindburn Station at the Maniatota. You might have seen him on Country Calendar a few weeks ago.
Shit, I'm getting my wires crossed. You're right. Yes. No, I did see that on Country Calendar. Who was the name I heard yesterday then? Goodness knows. I have to look back. That's embarrassing. Anyway, yes, I did watch that Country Calendar. Yeah, another Peter. My mum and dad actually said, you got to get on to Country Calendar for a couple of weeks ago. There's an epic episode on. It must have made you proud, man.
Yeah, no, it was it's not nothing, the old Country Calendar, and to be spreading, what we're doing with regenerative ag, firstly, it's sort of this thing where, I've been in the industry for a few years now, and it feels like just the last 6 months there's become this new sort of acceptance. It's no longer that we're all just hippies doing, cartwheels and paddocks of sunflowers.
What do you think's driving that, man?
Well, I think people are just ready to accept something new. I think farmers are just waking up to the obvious, which is, continually increasing inputs and continual decline in animal health, and I guess the profitability is sort of falling out the bottom of the bag in our agricultural sector. There's a lot of fat in the industry, but none of it's going to the farmers, and I think they're ready for something new because of that. You
were just having a discussion tonight. I bought a single lamb shank from New World today for close on $12, and that's what we were discussing. These $40 from one lamb. Where the heck's that money coming to the farm gate? It's very fascinating.
I guarantee you it's not, man.
No, that's exactly what my mate was saying. He doesn't farm a lot of sheep, but there's plenty around that, and so he knows the price. And the Wrightson's magazines there on the table, and you look at it and you're like, well, that doesn't add up to $40 for the hocks, mate. So where's the value position going to change with this? Is it about the story, or is it about the less input in the long run?
Okay, so let me give it to you like this. So it's like we can add more value to a product by increasing firstly, it's the cost of production is one thing, right? So the money that's being spent to produce, meat and milk and fiber is not, it's not economical. Mm-hmm. And most of the money that's being spent is being spent on treatments of symptoms of a broken system. And so rather than continuing to treat those symptoms and keeping stuck on what I call the rat wheel, where we're constantly throwing money in a system, just trying to make it work, where we're looking at problems, we're throwing money at fixing those problems rather than looking at, okay, why do those problems exist? And so it's really about taking a broader view and taking a step back and looking at, well, why is it that we're getting these issues? Why is it that we're having to treat these symptoms, and we create systems that prevent those symptoms from becoming an issue? We treat the cause rather than the symptom. And so firstly, that increases profitability just because we're spending less money on inputs. And secondly, we get to actually produce a product that, my whole thing is how do we produce food? Because I know that we can do it. Produce food in a way that we literally look at that food as medicine. When I talk about treating symptoms of an industrial agriculture system, it's the same in our medical industry. So we're, with our human health concerns, we're treating the symptoms of those. And again, like our farm systems, we're treating them very linearly. So very abstract, like all these individual parts, like the human being is one crazy complex organism. But instead, our medical, professionals look at us in all these different parts, and we remove things and we throw antibiotics in and we cut things out. And what we don't understand is that it has all these different ripple effects, much like agriculture. We throw all these fixes in, we cut all these bits out, and there's all these unintended consequences. And so, when you get present to a lot of what we're dealing with as a society, not just economically, but with regards to the way a global health epidemic and I'm not a big fan of the word climate change, but a lot of our weather extremes are actually coming down to the way we produce our food. So this way of farming not only increases farmer profitability, but you talked about the story. I think for the first time in a long time, people are demanding food that they can get a sense of how it was produced. And if people got a sense of how food was produced right now and why the story is so lacking, is because people would be horrified if they got, my background in chemical agronomy and conventional ag. It wasn't until I really got hit in the face with a few life events that made me question what I'd done for 15 years, until I realized that actually there's this pretty obvious link between the way we're producing our food and all of the problems we're dealing with right now, economically, socially, environmentally. Yeah. I guess.
Yeah. I really liked your parallel there to the medical system. And someone that works as a part of the medical system with the eyes, I often shock and confuse my patients when I start talking about them as a whole being, especially when they go, well, why is it doing this? And it's like, well, why is the the rest of it? Is it age? No, it's time under exposure. What have you done your whole life? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we really don't know. Like, for us to think it's one thing, the human body is never one thing.
Yeah.
It's never, we can't honestly say we know what's going on when we see an issue. Firstly, we've got to address, is there really a problem?
Yeah. So I guess that becomes, going back to regenerative and integrative agriculture, are we going back to what we used to have? Because I think people need to get an establishment of what the New Zealand pastoral system originally looked like. It was clearing away, forestry and things and scrub land, and then slowly developing pastures to be more, utilizable and better energy and better resistant. Is it that we've gone down that path too far or something, and we've lost that sort of diversity and ecology from our pastoral, agriculture? Is that where you're sort of thinking about that?
Yeah, man. So for me, nature had it worked out well before we came along. And it's not until we tried to, tweak the system, and we tried to, it all sort of goes back to, it really all goes back to the early wars. So in the early wars, it became this great focus on phosphate, and because it was a large part of warfare. And then when the wars finished, we needed something to do with all of that phosphate and all of this technology around different things and urea. And then all of a sudden we realized, oh, actually this stuff grows grass. It makes plants go berserk. And so of course we think, well, perfect opportunity to go and sell that to our food industry to grow pastures and what have you. And that got us started on this this idea that we started to know more than nature. You know, like then we started to throw science at the industry. We started to have science done on different things, again, really linear and reductional. You know, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, you know, plant plus you know, nitrate equals growth. Ammonia, it's all that stuff was obvious, but what the science, that reductionist science didn't equate for was all the unintended consequences of like what happens to the people that eat that stuff. What happens to the billions of microbes beneath that single plant that's being fed that, you know, man-made, you know, acidic fertilizer. And the other thing was it became very much about money. And so all of a sudden we've got these people invested with a pretty, you know, fat income based on the requirements of these products. And so we've just started this great, you know, the green revolution. We put all this stuff on, and if in the early days, you know, when they first come out with superphosphate, you put superphosphate on and man, it made the grass grow and you didn't need to put much of it on. So it was like, and it was cheap because there was lots of it around. And in the early days, you know, I look at it like a bit of a graph. So you'd spend this much money and you'd get, you know, this much response. And then over time, what's happened is with our response is sort of curving down, but the price and the input cost is just continually going up and our effectiveness is going down. And so now we're way over here and we're finally looking at, well, actually, why are we still going on like that? Like, I think you sort of hit it on the nail there, Ryan, is like, we just got a bit distracted in the over here rather than looking at what's going on in front of us, which, you know, growing food is actually really simple. If you talk to a lot of the old generations and hear some of their stories from their previous ancestors, is, you know, really things were going fine until we started interfering. And
So,
then what that did was it meant that we were growing products that, or food essentially, whether it was for animals or for us, that as a result of our meddling, we required a lot more of that product to be nutritionally satisfied. And so in come the obesity epidemic. And if you look at human health trends, it's all of our autoimmune diseases and a lot of the illnesses we treat right now in human beings all started back then. And the trend is like a dead parallel to our industrial farming model.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, you hear people harp on about organics and how it saved their autoimmune, but, you know, there's, you know, correlation's not causation, but there's a pretty stern thing to take a look at. That's for sure. That correlation, and like you say, we're continuing to see the downstream effects of that, like, you know, things like autism, things like autoimmune disease, things like eczema and asthma and allergies and food allergies, and it's just like, what's going on here? This is interesting. Well, one of the questions that I've got to you see these large pastures and the sort of no-till stuff. How then does the dead matter contribute to parasites and worms and things like that? What's important to know when you look at that and you think about dead matter in a pasture and the animal health? You know, what's the, from your perspective, what's the answer to that question?
So when you say dead matter, is that just like brown, dried off plant material?
Yeah.
So to give you an understanding, you know, for a plant, it goes through a cycle where it goes vegetative and then it becomes reproductive, and then it goes through a senescence, and that original, you know, parental plant dies off and drops seed, and that's its life cycle, depending on whether it's an annual or biannual or perennial, of course. But for everything, even perennials, they go through a senescence, they go through a dropping of the leaves or a releasing of some seed, or, you know, and to go through that, it's a bit like whether you're looking at human beings or animals or, you know, everything in life, there's a death and a rebirth, and death is equally as important as life, and that's going a bit beyond. But to give you an understanding, and this is a big part of what we're dealing with is monocultures. So when we're dealing with one plant species, which is what we've loved because it's given us the ability to predict and control how things behave, because we can monitor one plant. When it's on its own, it does certain things. It has certain characteristics that we can pick up on and understand, and then project into our future so that we can plan. But when you've got one thing and you have senescence, well, that's not a great thing, because all that brown material is all carbon. And although carbon's great for the soil, for any decomposition microbially, which is the same as what happens in our stomachs and our animal stomachs, is we need we need a ratio of carbon and nitrogen. For microbial decomposition, it's around 23 to 25 to 1. And so we look at brown material as high carbon. So for instance, cereal stubble, that's around 80% carbon. So straw, what you see farmers feeding their cows. So brown material you can look at as being carbon. Fungi love carbon. But again, for decomposition, you want some nitrogen as well. So that's your green stuff. So in these pastures you're asking the question about, when we've got all these different species, you've got some that are still growing vegetative, you've got some that have gone reproductive, you've got a nice blend that animals can come in and self-medicate on, getting that ratio as well as they know how to, because that's all subconscious for them. They don't need to have a Lincoln technical farm manual to understand what they need. They know exactly what they need. So when we come in there with animals, that goes through the rumen, becomes digestible through that rumination process. Out the other end, it goes onto the soil. Microbes come up and feed on that like a frenzy. Again, it's got the perfect ratio of carbon and nitrogen, lots of other compounds, and that goes into the soil to feed the soil biology. And in the process, through those animals coming through that brown material, trampling it down onto the soil surface, creating what we call a living mulch. That's the perfect habitat for microbes to live, and also to protect the soil from the elements, as well as creating what we call a suspension layer. So it's a bit like, you jack your car up on the side of the road with a bottle jack. You've got to have a block under it. Well, that suspension layer is what's preventing our cows from pushing their hooves into the soil. But in modern agriculture, we see that trample layer as wastage. So we're all about the utilization in modern agriculture. So we like to smash our pastures to the boards, leaving no living mulch, no suspension layer. We compact our soils, and on goes that downward spiral.
So basically what I'm taking away from that is, because there's such a diverse array of species in that pasture, the animals will select the ones that are in their growth phase and ignore the ones that are either senescent or dead. And therefore there's
they'll
still eat those. Yeah, so there's no opportunity for
they need that, you know.
Yeah.
Well, they need that carbon, they need that roughage, or traditionally viewed as fiber and protein. I just use the terminology nitrogen and carbon rather than looking at protein and fiber. So, you know, a lot of farmers will feed a lot of green feed, and with that green feed, they'll feed roughage like straw, which is high carbon. Otherwise, we get animals that are, you know, shitting through the eye of a needle, because what's missing is that carbon.
Yeah.
And so if you put animals out there, what I've found is actually they prefer when things are brown. So to give you an understanding, just at the moment, we're getting into the cooler time of the year, and we're getting frost in Canterbury.
Yep.
I've got farmers that have got diverse species pastures with different things that are frost sensitive. One being sunflowers is a really interesting one. So dairy cows don't necessarily enjoy sunflowers. Well, some of them do at different times. But what we've discovered is actually once they've been hit by the frost and they've gone to a brown colour, the cows actually prefer them. They'll hoe into them once they're brown. So it's only a perception that we think everything needs to be green. It's not the case. And you ask any farmer out there who, especially dairy farmers, because they get to see this firsthand, is you put cows onto a new grass paddock that's all nitrogen, And then when you get the cows in for milking, man, they're all shitting through the eye of a needle. It's just, you know, a mess.
Mm-hmm. So
because there's no brown.
Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of this going on in the high country. Well, how does it sort of work in, say, the Waikato, where, you know, certain times of the year spore counts for eczema, you know, skyrocket? Does this idea work there as well and prevent things like eczema?
So with anything, you know, insect burden, parasites, fungal disease burden, all these things are there because of a susceptibility. So in plants, when we have plants that aren't photosynthesizing well enough, which is a plant's main job, is to take the sunlight and carbon dioxide and turn it into complex carbohydrates and sugars to feed the soil. That's all a plant's here to do. When it's not doing that job properly enough, well enough, that shows up in what we call its bricks, or its soluble sugars in its sap, and we can test that really easily on the fly with a refractometer. So when that happens, when we get low photosynthetic capability from plants, it's like a sixth sense. It puts a red flag up and sends a signal out to nature and says, I'm not doing my job. Send in the fungal pathogens, send in the insects to come and eat me, essentially, to make way for a better plant. With our animals, and what I discovered in one of my last years in farm management on an organic farm in Canterbury, Harts Creek Farm. If anyone's read For the Love of Soil by Nicole Masters, they would have read about this, is that I, in my last year, through feeding high diversity to my store lambs, grazing just the top third, trampling a percentage onto the soil surface, and I was also feeding free choice humates, which are essentially it's soft brown coal or lignite. I had the first year on farm where we didn't drench a lamb, and that farm's 36-year organic history. And so, although there may have been, you know, different fecal egg counts were high in my fecal egg count tests, and there were parasites about, the lambs were completely resilient to those pests. So even though they were there, they weren't susceptible. So although I can't say directly for facial eczema, facial eczema is a disease. You know, it's a susceptibility. And my belief is once we get the animals resilient, they are no longer susceptible to those things that we commonly treat.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you think that there is a potential case that those eggs pass through, and that's why they're high in the fecal count?
100%. So they're passing through without being of burden to the animal.
Mm-hmm.
A bit like same with plants that are brixing or photosynthesizing really well. Next door to a paddock that's not, you can have insects fly over that crop, and you think you've got an insect-proof fence. They'll smash that crop that's not performing well. And it's a bit like, you know, in for instance, we'll look at fly strike. Fly strike doesn't attack the whole flock, right? And only attacks some. It attacks the weak and the vulnerable. So if we can build resilience, and that stuff doesn't happen overnight, but it's quicker than what we understand, is through feeding diversity to animals and understanding different dietary requirements and nutrition, is that, you know, we can have, for instance, neighbors that are getting hammered with, for instance, fly strike, or, you know, like you say up north, the facial eczema thing. And although I can't speak from experience from being from the south, farmed in the south all my life, is you know, if we can build resilience, those things aren't a concern anymore, but like human beings.
And so on that time frame, you know, what are the sort of feedback steps that someone's going to get, you know, sort of like 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years type stuff?
As far as progression?
Yeah. And like, is it something that it needs to be done paddock by paddock to slowly transition a farm, or transition the animals, you know, from monoculture to you know, integrated pasture? How does that all sort of work to transition if you get a pastoral piece of land and it's all one or two species?
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, like with regenerative ag, there's no one right way. You know, there's so many different ways. Regenerative agriculture is just like the overarching umbrella. And so for me, it's about, and what I do with my business, Natural Performance, is listening for the individual farmers, concerns and interests, and listening for what they're dealing with, and focusing. And my job is to come along and notice the obvious limitations within the system that of which most of them aren't visible to the farmer, but are really easy to deal with. So we look at what are the biggest limitations, we address those first. If it's just simply we need to introduce diversity, well, that's really easy to do. Even on, hill country that's inaccessible by tractor, we can still do stuff there to get plant diversity in. But really, it's just understanding, the basics of ecosystem function. Just to give you like something tangible, I started working with a dairy farm up here in Canterbury. They have multiple dairy farms. They showed an interest in plant diversity, and what we did was we went in and planted. Peter Barrett and I, with our seed company Symbiosis, we created a 21 species seed mix for this dairy farm client to plant on their dairy platform. And like, these guys were skeptical. They really only came to me for advice to be part of a steering committee because of some issues they were having around environmental responsibility. And so, I come along and they're thinking, who's this guy? But I created this mix, 21 species for farmers to even fathom growing that many different species. And that's just a low diversity. We're doing 60 species, but this one was 21. And it had been run fully conventionally, lots of fertilizer, compaction. The place had no worms, and we thought, right, this is great. So we created a mix to suit what they were dealing with, again, of which the variation is huge. We've never done two seed mixes the same because everyone's dealing with different things. It comes down to what's your soil condition like physically, microbially, minerally, what's the management like, all these things. And so we put this mix in, and we planted it in the end of November last year. And it got to the first week of March, and we had done some independent dry matter analysis on it, and it ended up growing over 11 ton in that time with no fertilizer. And these guys were just like, what on earth? And it cost them like less than 4 cents per kilogram of dry matter to grow. And that was amazing enough. And the photos of that crop were just phenomenal. And we're digging through, and the worms just appeared in that 3-month period, from nothing to, you're talking 50 per spade. And the soil color changed, and the soil porosity changed. And when we come in with the animals, not to mention the ecosystem services that crop's providing, with all those plants flowering and bees coming in, and you've got ladybugs and drone flies and all these things outside of the normal parameters that we measure as farmers that are so important. But what happened was, the striking thing was, when they come in with their cows during late lactation to graze, the start of these crops in early March was they noticed an increase in production in March, which is, not common. And it was directly correlated to the introduction of the diversity. Now, this took this took 3.5 months. And so that crop now, after grazing, this is the other thing, and even though most of it was annual, we selected the annual species to suit the requirements of the soil. We got the soil functioning. We've now come in and planted diverse perennials in these pastures. Again, no fertilizer, no termination. And these pastures on this dairy platform are now, in theory, our whole intention here is to grow pasture now in these areas. There's no more fruit going on them.
For those that don't know, can you explain termination?
Yeah. So spraying out with glyphosate.
Yeah. And why would someone do that or need to do that?
So in agriculture, people use it like it's, going out of fashion. It's sprayed to terminate crop, to kill crops, to make way for new crops. Right now, for those of you that don't understand, in America, there's technology where we're genetically modifying seeds to produce plants that are resistant to this product called glyphosate or Roundup. It's quite destructive right now on the planet. It's in most of our urine. It's in the rain in America. It's really not a good product. Again, science, in its day said that the stuff was safe, and we're now seeing it rear its ugly head in ways we weren't expecting. But for us in agriculture, it's used as a tool to move from one crop to create a blank canvas to come in with another crop. And there's times where I'll still use that product, but we chelate it with fulvic acid or a carbon source to make it more stable in the soil. We can then increase its efficiency, so we can cut rates right back. I'm talking less than half. And it stays within the plant rather than leaking out through the, like on its own when it's not chelated. It's a water-soluble molecule. It hits water and it's gone through the aquifer, or it goes into plants that are then eaten by animals. And it's it's something we're really looking at trying to get away from using.
Mm-hmm. And so what sort of progress now is that dairy farm looking at doing? Is it, expanding on what you guys done, or keeping it as a project type thing?
So they are now converting 2 of their dairy farms, 50% of the farms this season, to these pastures. And we also are recreating for them their whole winter feed regime from monoculture, fodder beet and kale, mainly fodder beet, to growing massive diversity to feed the soil rather than destroy it. And at a fraction of the cost, like I'm talking a fraction of the cost.
Talk us through that destruction of the soil from, feeding out fodder beet or kale.
Yeah. So fodder beet and kale, anything growing on its own is not, it's like, diversity is so powerful because you've got all these different things. Like, for instance, to give you an understanding, in the soil, our microbial diversity is a correlate of the plant diversity, because our plants are actually the feeders of the soil. That's what plants are. And if we feed the soil one plant, it's like us living on one food. One, it's not very pleasant. But 2, over time, you actually develop this susceptibility and this lacking resilience. You need to eat so much more of that single thing to be satisfied. It just doesn't work. And so in the soil, when we're just growing one thing, our microbial diversity, which is the foundation of ecosystem function, our microbes, and the same as in our stomachs as human beings, is our performance and our resilience, and in fact our mood and all sorts of things, performance, are affected by our microbial diversity. So the gut is much like the soil. And so when we grow one thing in the soil, we're feeding a low diversity of microbes in the soil. So we can't expect great things to come from that soil, because we don't have a great workforce. It's like having 1 million Jonos in a room and asking, for a ballet lesson. You're not going to get one. And so in the soil, when we grow one thing, the soil itself doesn't get fed enough diversity of those carbohydrates or carbon compounds and other molecules to support diverse structures and diverse communities in the soil. So we get really poor performance, and we need to put all this fertilizer on because we can't provide it through our biology. It's the biology that provides the minerals to our plants, much like it's the biology for us that provides our minerals to us. We actually don't eat any of our food. It's for the microbes in our stomach to then make into different, metabolites and energy, essentially, for us. And not only that, but in the soil, we have different microbes. We have bacteria and fungi. And we want an even ratio of each. And we've also got this stuff called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Now, these are long, hyphal threads that over time have developed symbiotic relationships with plants to become a literal extension of the root system of between 80 and 90% of our plants. Like it literally becomes the internet of the soil. So this fungal hyphae are invisible to the naked eye. It's called a mycelium. They tap into the root system of, like I said, between 80 and 95% of plants I used to say 95, and then I heard Nicole Masters say 8, so I'm going to say between. There's some plants that don't support this mycorrhizal fungi network. So what it looks like is, like I said, it's a literal extension of the root mass of our plants. That means that that plant can then not only access water and nutrients from deep down in the soil, and I'm talking miles away. These fungal hyphae are the smallest but yet the largest living organisms on the planet. These guys connect other plants to each other so they can communicate, they can exchange nutrients, they can pump carbon. Multi-directional transport systems and communication networks, and they're vital for soil structure formation and for holding our soils together. Now, when we grow, so to give you an understanding, there's a few plants that we use in agriculture that don't support these guys. One's fodder beet, one's kale. So you can understand, you know, when we grow these things, we're not getting the support of that fungi. So we have to keep putting the stuff on, more stuff on. You know, I call it the more on method. We just keep putting more on. Not only that, but because we're putting all that stuff on, the food we're producing isn't whole and complete. It's not got all those gorgeous trace elements and secondary metabolites that our animals so desperately need. Instead, it's pumped with synthetics that we have to pour on. Then we come in and graze that stuff. And because they're just, I mean, kale is just a straight, tall brassica that doesn't cover the soil. So when our animals come in and eat it, and of course we want to utilize 100% of it, so it's all decked, our animals are standing in mud. They're compacting that soil. When I talk about biology providing ecosystem services and mineral provision for our plants, if we can't house that biology in our soil, i.e. if we've not got effective gas exchange and soil porosity, so our soil can't breathe, then we can't expect our microbes to be surviving and doing work for us. They won't. And so we come in and graze these pastures, and like fodder beet, you know, they grow these big, massive tubers, and yes, they grow 30 ton per hectare with a good crop. But when we come in and graze this stuff, what happens, and not only just through the grazing, but through these massive tubers growing outwards in the soil like that, and they're all close together, we're actually compacting our soil vertically through these tubers growing next to each other. So before we've even grazed that pasture or that crop, the soil is already compacted through the growth of this massive tuber. The soil is not vibrant and alive, so it's collapsing under its own weight. And then we come in and graze it, and we've now got these environments where we go from drought to flood because our soils, one, can't take and hold moisture, and two, when we get the moisture, it just runs off and takes all the nutrients with it. So topsoil, you know, applied nutrients, dung, urine. You just need to look at the rivers at the moment to get an understanding of what's going on out there, and this is a big part of it.
Yeah, there's an interesting article today that was speaking to that nitrogen cap thing. It was on your Facebook page, Quorum Sense, and there was, you know, saying how there's applying it, there's pissing on the soil, and then there's clover, and what's the cap going to do? It's just going to be more piss and clover. But we need to worry about what's leaching out and or running off. And you sort of said that if you've got the environment, then you're restricting that in a way. I didn't see that point raised.
Well, you're onto it, man. That mycelium will also filter any toxins in the soil. So it's like nature's filter. You know, people use carbon filters in their water systems. It's carbon in the soil is our filtering agent. It's our cleansing agent. And mycelium and fungi do that also. But the real thing is, you know, nitrogen, there's 60,000 tons of it above every hectare in the form of atmospheric nitrogen. We do not need to apply that stuff. And it's not just legumes and cow piss that puts it into our soil. There's bacteria and archaea that live within the soil that convert that atmospheric nitrogen into usable organic compounds of nitrogen that's plant available. We don't need to be applying nitrogen. And that's the thing when we're growing monocultures. Yes, you're so susceptible to taking from the soil and you need to apply. We get into this discussion around removal rates. However, when you're growing diversity and you're pumping all that liquid carbon through that photosynthesis of those plants and all those different forms of carbohydrates into the soil, we can actually build soil carbon quicker than what we've known to be possible in 1 year than what we used to think we could grow in a generation through this diversity. But of course, if we look back through time, it's not been something we've embraced. You know, diversity. It's like it's crucial in the ecosystem, much like it's crucial in human beings. You know, we need that diversity of input, but instead we're all attached to these uniform and linear and you know, tidy ways of living and farming and, you know, everything really, isn't it?
You've you know, you've had it on a hot topic right now, that diversity of species and human and interaction and input. Yeah, that's what we're experiencing right now. Well, the states are, but it's you know, amazing how quickly that spills out into the social psyche of, oh shit, what's our system? Like you say, but like the farming, what's our system? You know, where we rocking? Where are all our ideas coming from? And yeah, it's fascinating what you said. How we sort of went on this path of improving our pastoral land, and we didn't. I don't know. We didn't take time to think. Okay, we're dealing with nature here. What does nature do? How does ecology work? We've improved the sort of outcomes of our pasture, you know, but at what cost, and at what problems are we also creating? And that's what you said. We keep trying to address the problems without thinking of how did they start.
Man, and when we're talking about ecosystems, you know, it's so complex we can't even begin to understand it. You know, the science world are not currently capable with their current thinking to grasp the pure complexity of what's going on out there. You know, nothing's ever as obvious as it seems. You know, like, for instance, there was a time where it was scientifically proven that DDT was safe. You know, and look what happened there. You know, for the last few decades, we've been talking about Roundup being drinkable. And so, and because it doesn't directly affect the human being, but it indirectly affects the human being by affecting the different pathways, the different neurological pathways, the different microbial flora. It's essentially an antimicrobial agent. And so it's a bit like saying that certain insecticides don't affect human beings, but what they do is affect the biology that supports us human beings. So indirectly, it does affect us. And we're just seeing that, you know, the effects of these things that we've always proven to be safe, that science has said is safe. And, you know, I'm taking this from the guys that have been in risk assessment for a long time, like Jonathan Lundgren, ex-USDA, came and stayed at my house last year. It was so cool hanging out with him. You know, he says when you read a bottle of a product you buy at even the garden shop, or for farmers from your local supplier of a chemical that says it's safe, from the person that created the regulations for those products, he's saying nobody is watching. We have no idea nor any ability to test for risk assessment, because the effects need to be assessed on every living organism. And like when you're dealing with healthy soil and ecosystems, you know, a teaspoon of healthy soil has more microbes than there are humans on this planet. And each of those microbes need their own unique assessment done. And we're not capable of that.
I think you've answered a question that I had coming into this, and sort of a couple of parallels I had was like gut flora, things like small intestinal overgrowth and then bacterial overgrowth. And then one of the things that I've been dealing with lately in our practice is a microscopic mite that we all have that grows in our eyelashes. And then for some reason, I get these people that have an overgrowth of it. And that was sort of my question in terms of pasture, whether that be, you know, weed species, inverted commas, or, you know, pest microbes or bacteria or worms or whatever, you know. But realistically, it's because of, like you said at the start, it's a broken system, and that's the outcome of a broken system. You've pushed too far one way, and I guess from the human perspective, it's, you know, what's our diet? What are the, again, inverted commas, toxic things that we've been absorbing, and allowed for this microbe or bacteria or virus, even, you know, COVID, to take a strong hold and take an opportunity to dominate and cause problems. So am I right in drawing that parallel?
Yeah, man. So, like I said, with regards to the soil, its resilience and performance and effectiveness is directly correlated to its microbial diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Same in our animals. It's the same in us, man. And so, not only from a mineral perspective, but there's this thing, and I invite you to get curious in this. It's called quorum sensing. So,
Mm-hmm.
what that is it's when we get a level of microbial diversity beyond a threshold where all of a sudden there's this crazy symbiotic relationship between these microbes all walking towards the same thing, and things start to happen. Like, for instance, in humans, it literally creates gene expression.
Mm.
So I'm going to tell you about someone who I know personally that reversed a terminal disease. I'm not going to name it because it's sensitive, by eating 30 plus plant foods per week.
Mm.
Now, what happened with this person was through eating all that diverse food and bearing in mind these were whole foods, and a bit like farms, there's no point throwing 30 plant species into a paddock if you're still going to use superphosphate. It doesn't work. It kills the fungal networks. Much like human beings, we can't be throwing 30 different whole plant foods into our stomachs while we're still taking antibiotics,
Mm.
or we're entertaining negative thoughts that suppress our gene expression. And so it's about increasing your gut flora to a point where you've got all those quorum sensing molecules firing. Our genes start expressing, some of which may have never expressed before. Like, some things that I know in human beings that we perceive as hereditary are not hereditary. You can actually overcome those things. I'll give you an understanding. So, and you can get microbial flora. Like, for instance, there's massive things right now drawing links between children born through C-section and children that have gone through the vaginal pathway and been inoculated from that child's mother's native flora. There's massive differences in susceptibility in those children that never went through that canal and got that ever so important microbial flora from its mother. To the point where it's and then they're born into a doctor's arms who are completely sterile. They don't get that ever so important inoculation of those really healthy gut floras. It's the same in our diets and in our society, is we're lacking. Everything's clean, everything's sterile, and we're not touching each other. We're not hugging each other. We have people that get sick and then they go into hospitals and then they're isolated from human beings and not touched by human hands, and they're certainly not around soil. You can be handling soil and be inoculated through that healthy soil. There was a time where people ate vegetables, they weren't washed, they certainly weren't chemically sterilized. And there's a link between that and all of our health concerns. And I'm a twin, and my twin sister lived in the city. She wasn't around a farming environment like me. And all my years as a chemical agronomist and a conventional farmer, although there's times and I've had chemical exposure more than most, but I was always around soil. And
Mm.
now more than ever, I'm handling soil every day. I'm inhaling soil like it's cocaine. It's just like, oh my God. And I get this, I mean, I don't get sick, but yet my sister, she developed epilepsy in her 20s. She's on first name basis at the hospital. I love my sister to bits. She had an autistic son.
Mm.
And that's why I'm so committed. Like, and he's the most gorgeous boy, my nephew Cooper. And this is just the world he was born into. And it all comes down to your gut flora, man. I'm telling you. Like, right now, it's been argued that we are only expressing on average about 8% of our total gene pool because of our diet. You start increasing that gut flora, you're going to start expressing more genes.
Yeah,
But we're not getting taught this.
No, that's yeah. I've been pushing, basically this whole time I've been doing the podcast to be closer to your food, and the more and more I go hunting, the and I used to go tramping as well, but the more and more I get out there, and like you say, that smell of the bush, and when you get dirt on your hands and you get in, what a rush that is. Like, it's fantastic. But yeah, that we are missing out on so much life and experience and everything. And yeah, like we had our deer stalkers meeting last night, and I said to the president, I was like, always jokingly, of course, I said, "Where's the hand sanitizer?" And he said, "Oh, I think we're past that." And I said, "Yeah, it's driving me nuts. Wiping, we're clean all
Yeah,
the
man.
time, but it's just absolutely disrupted everything." And I know it's a first world problem, but it is a first world problem. Like our 99% bacterial killing is not good, and it's been fascinating observing the different levels and the extremes and the ends of the spectrum that we've had with this COVID-19, and I still don't know where the hell I fall on it, and I don't think I ever will. And hindsight's gonna cloud that judgment, but yeah, it's been definitely a challenge, and I'm sure it's a challenge for everyone in different ways. And that's what it's always been said, that everyone's experiencing this differently, and it's all challenging. So yeah, it's, and I think that's the beauty of what you're doing, is it's putting the spotlight not just on a farming system, but realistically a human system, an earth system, and that's the other thing that I've developed an appreciation for is ecology. Being out there in nature and looking at the impact of one, for the sake of the other. And it's kind of like, where's the balance of it, and how do we as humans try and control it? Well, we can't.
No, you just got to be part of it, man. We're no better than any other bug or critter on the planet.
Yeah, and it's pretty crack up going to one of the areas in the Kawikas that I go to is covered in contorta, and it's just like, well, that was such a balls up.
Don't even get me started. Yeah, I mean, 1080, all that stuff. We just don't have any idea what it's doing.
Yeah, that's right.
I almost didn't want to
Yeah,
bring that up, but
yeah, that's all right. It's it's one of those things that it's hard to know the right answer. What's the plan and what's the consequence? What are you willing to deal with? And that's probably going to be a debate forever. As long as it's used, it's going to be a debate, and fair enough too. When you talk about, you've talked about diversity of plant species, diversity of microbes, diversity of fungi, and then the diversity for us. The link in between, does it need to be, and you've spoken about a dairy farm, so does it need to be a diverse species grazing, or can it be just a dairy cow?
you can have just a dairy cow, but there's science to back up the power of different animals for sure. I started when we've had cool people come to the country like Ian Mitchell Innes, and you look at Gabe Brown, and you listen to the likes of Alan Savory. Diversity is really important in animals as well. And I started a bit of a movement, and I call it I called it mob life. Hashtag mob life.
Yeah, I saw your little gang signs.
My mob life, and I actually Googled the hashtag mob life, and it's not. There's different things on there, but anyway, the idea is to get as many different animals into a great mob and shift them along really quickly. And so you get then, because each of those animals contain different microbes in their gut, they perform different roles as far as what they'll graze and how they'll behave on the soil. And what we get as a result of that animal diversity is not only a diversity of enterprises on the farm, so you're not got all your eggs in one basket, but you've also got all these different microbes that are going through that animal, coming out in the dung and urine and inoculating our soils. And so, it's not uncommon anymore to see, sheep and cows and even pigs. You look at Mangarara Station, Mangarara Farm, Greg Hart. They've got pigs, they've got chickens. They're all providing their own little unique service in that ecosystem. And although it's not necessary, because we've done the monoculture thing for so long, and it's we're still somehow alive, but there are benefits to having that diversity, and not just from an ecosystem perspective, but an economic perspective as well.
Yeah, it's definitely, from being exposed to the farm in Byron Bay and yeah, looking at things like chicken tractors and pigs, and every time Joel Salatin's on anything, I'll tune in and have a listen. Ellen Savory as well. It's like, oh yeah, there he goes again, saying that. My
Joe
passion,
was on the
Joe Rogan,
yeah, man, he was.
Yeah, he's a champ. I heard him actually talking to Pete Evans, and he was talking about the level of moisture in Australia when they sort of the first sort of agronomy that they had over there was something like tenfold of what they've got now. And I guess that what you were talking to before, the what they're growing, how they're grazing it, and turning it around. Where I was in Northern Rivers, it was really fascinating. Massively low stocking rate, but over big paddocks. But then the moment the rain came, everything bolted. It's pretty bizarre countryside that Australia, and they got their own issues.
Man, rain's a crazy thing. I started learning about hydrology, and wow, we talk about climate change being a greenhouse gas thing. I tell you what, you want to get interested in hydrology, what those layers of mist and vapor do to heating the soil, but also, if people that don't understand what's required for a cloud to go from that formation of just mist and small water particles to precipitation is actually a biological reaction, and that biology comes from photosynthesizing plants on the ground. And so when we don't have green plants growing on the ground, our rain clouds don't form. That they're not formed as rapidly as what they would be when that biology is present. It's if you look at for those that are interested, Walter Jena. That's Walter Jenna. Sorry, Walter, I spelled that wrong. He's an Australian hydrologist, and he's really clever. He's retired. I've heard him speak, and he is just a wealth of knowledge. Check him out. It will shift your view on a lot of things, what the impacts of water has on the world.
So on that point, how much he's sort of versed in the planting of trees and the types of trees and how we should have them interspersed with the pasture?
I'm keen for trees, but I've got no time for monoculture radiata pine plantations.
I'm with you.
I've got people right now rallying together trying to buy land to stave it being planted in radiata pines. It's just, these people are telling me these stories of storm events and rivers, post harvest of these plantations, and just the runoff and the debris and the destruction. Right now our biggest export is literally topsoil.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not keen on making something wrong, as in pointing something out as a negative without coming in with a positive solution. So when we're talking about pines, I'm not saying pine trees are a bad thing, but only pine trees are not so cool. So getting interested in planting some different species, I'm all for the silver pasture thing. So growing trees in amongst pasture, like trees are highly mycorrhizal. We talked about the mycorrhizal network before. Trees are highly mycorrhizal. They can communicate kilometers apart. They can wage war on each other. They can kill a tree if they like. But again, if it's just one tree, you don't get that diversity. You don't get that interaction. So, yes, I've got a view on trees, and that's sort of my broad view.
Yeah, one of my favourite farms is Peel Forest, and they make sure they've got trees all through those deer paddocks, and yeah, it looks bloody beautiful.
There's some trees there, man, that I look at like, wow. I've been there once, and I was just like, blow it. You look at these trees and you think, if these things could tell stories, I wonder what they could say.
Few angry stags, that's for sure. Yeah.
I've never hugged a tree, but
no, mate, I've out in the bush. I've definitely put my hand on a few trees, and I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. The last time I did it, it's when I finally found deer in the wild, and I don't know. Might have been telling me something. Who knows?
you listen to Paul Stamets, you know, he had his first hallucinogenic mushroom trip in a tree as a storm cloud passed over, and he said he was holding on to this tree for dear life as the storm came over, and he got down from the tree. And for those of you who haven't seen Fantastic Fungi, I suggest you watch that movie. It is, I think you'll love it, Ryan. I think you'll get a lot from that movie. But he said he's got a lot to thank that tree for, and he came down and gave it a bit of a hug, and then carried on about his day.
Yeah, that is an amazing story. I don't know if I'll be climbing a tree in the middle of a thunderstorm, but he
The
did it.
thunderstorm came after he took the bag of mushrooms, you see.
Yeah, no, that's quite the tale. Yeah, no. You said about how when you've got a diverse crop and then a monocrop, how it's literally like a pest-proof fence. Is it, you know, and you said about all the diverse species that then promote to it. Is it that no one can get a stranglehold? Like, is that what's going on? That you're like, oh, I'm not going to go there. I'm seeing, you know, a certain amount of bullies, or, you know, your bullies, or your things that you're scared of. Do you think? Like this communication basically between,
Like as in death. Well, look, man, you look in the media right now, there's some scared people. Like, and the people that are scared are the ones whose salary rely on people not getting the stuff. And I completely get that. Like, you know, I completely understand. Like, it's people's livelihoods in some cases. And what we need to do as a society is just address, you know, how is it that we've accepted all this stuff so far? You know, of course it's going to be hard to change. You look at what those, you know, industries are worth. Those fertilizer industries are huge. And so and it's what people know, you know, like when you look at the literature and when you look at the industry leaders, they are not talking about, although they're starting to now, it's really exciting, but traditionally they've not talked about diversity. There's been naffle mention of biology when you go and do a soil science degree, and what's missing is an allowance to understand. Because when I say allowance, it's like people have got to learn to be able to let go of what they've been told, you know, because I had to do that from my years as a conventional farmer and as an agronomist. I had to let go of all that knowledge because a lot of it was contradictory.
mm-hmm.
And so it is challenging to grasp the concepts of what we're talking about here with regards to diversity, because we've spent our lives controlling diversity. You know, we get plants growing in places we don't want them to grow. We have herbicides to take those out. You know, we don't like diversity. We think it's competition. It's almost the same as the human being context. We think that others are a threat to us, when if you embrace others, all of a sudden you're more powerful than what you would have ever been and locked in a room on your own, or surrounding yourself with the same type of people. Right now I have this love for people. When I look around, I love so many. I just look around. I used to be a judgmental prick. I used to look around at people like if they weren't the same as me, they were weird. And look at me now, like I'm really weird. And so it's like what I teach as far as diversity and acceptance is like, if people can learn to accept and embrace diversity and chaos, is we're going to go a whole lot further.
Yeah, shit, yeah, mate. And then I've been drawing a long bow. Again, my mum, she's a wealth of knowledge. She's an microbiologist herself. She was telling me about this number plate study they do in the UK, where they look at the amount of bugs splattered on number plates, and it's pretty indicative to the amount of bugs that are around the place, and it's dropped. And then on the other hand, you've got in Africa, I think it's the third locust plague in a row. And you just, again, that diversity of species, diversity of crop, just as, and I think they were saying about the way the water's gone over there, that's just created this shitstorm of things. Is that where your mind immediately goes when you read that in the news?
Look, man, the more we try and control nature, the more violent she's going to be in coming back with a plan.
Yeah.
Like, I mean that. Like, it's it's, you know, I wrote a poem recently called We Are Nature, and it really sums everything up for me. And I've read it before publicly, and people can find it online. But it is just, the more that we try and manipulate and control nature, you know, she's always got a plan sorted. And we talk, like, you listen to Dr. Zach Bush, you go and listen to him. He's saying right now we're in the midst of the next big extinction. And it's not that the planet's going anywhere, because it's not. It's just as to whether we're going to be hanging around. And so it's like, you know, what's required here is a paradigm shift in what we're doing on this planet. You know, like, the more we try and control, the more we try and keep things uniform, the more we try and kill. When I say kill, like, you just look at agriculture and medicine. We want to kill things. We want to remove things. It's creating an imbalance. That imbalance has got to be harmonized by nature, and she'll do it. You know, like, we destroy, she creates. We simplify, she diversifies. And we've just got to learn to be able to embrace that diversity. It's so important in all contexts.
Yeah, I just had another thought on that diversity thing. It's even in investing, isn't it? It's, you know, you said it before, don't put your eggs in one basket. Have a diversified portfolio. Like, God, it's staring us in the face. It's in plain sight.
It is, man. Yeah, and the bugs thing, I've seen it before too, and Mum talks about it as well. My mum's not a microbiologist, but that's the truth, man. You know, it's been said right now we're killing 20,000 species a day, not insects and bugs, but microbes a lot. You know.
Yeah, no, it's bloody bizarre. We're humans, as the saying goes.
It's like we I mean, sure, we've developed different, you know, language is our big benefit to other species. We've got this thing called language, but other than that, like, why are we any different to, you know, a stag?
Yeah.
What gives us, yeah.
Mate, where do people find you? Because I think they are going to want to find you. And I was just flicking through Quorum since before, and that fungi, you've got a link in there as well. Is that right, or has that already been?
Fantastic Fungi, well, is that what you're referring to? I mean, if you want to find me, it's Fantastic Fungi is just online. It's not been released yet. It's fantasticfungi.com. Paul Stamets is a big part of that one. He's a mycologist. If people want to contact me, check out naturalperformance.co.nz, symbiosis.co.nz, quorumsense.org.nz, Google, Jono Frew, YouTube, Jono Frew. It's all pretty accessible.
Yeah, mate. And so what would you leave people with? I usually phrase this question as something that keeps showing up in your life that doesn't do you wrong. And I think we might have said it already, diversity, but is there anything that to you, to your core, that sort of continually shows up? And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be related to farming or pasture or whatever.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be two things. I want people to get really interested in acceptance. So just accepting people for just the way they are, including themselves. You know, you've got to learn to accept the way you are. And expression, self-expression, all that stuff that you're holding on to, all that stuff that you're saving, you know, all that stuff that people don't know because you won't tell them, but you're wondering why they don't know. It's because you're not telling them. You got to tell them, good and bad. So expression and acceptance would be a much better place if we just embrace those two things.
I love that. You're wondering why they don't know. It goes to that thing that you said that makes us human and different as humans is communication. Use it.
Yeah. Or lack of. You know, we're getting around like dropping hints, wondering why people won't pick up our hints and getting angry because they're not picking up our hints. Come on.
It's bloody awesome. So yeah, that's why Jono Frew is across a number of platforms, so we can communicate with you. That's bloody awesome, man.
That's right. I'm here to speak and listen.
Awesome, mate. Well, thank you so much for your time. Later evening on a Thursday night, and as you said, you've had a full-on day, so I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that a lot of people start diving into where their food comes from, how it's made, and maybe even doing a little bit of that themselves, even if it is in their own backyard.
Not hard to do. I'll happily teach you how.
Yeah, awesome, mate.